And here's a little poster that you'll see in this presentation. I don't know if I can get this propped up or not. So I was sitting where you're sitting this time last year. That's good enough. It'll probably fall over, but. And so I know how exciting it is. In fact, this winter, it feels just a little bit like, oh my goodness, I want to be in the Master Gardener class every week. It was a lot of fun. The first thing I want to do is, while I'm talking, I'm just going to pass this around so you can look at it. This is the product that I have and I sell. I do have a worm farm, probably 70,000 worms, which is about 70 pounds. They're composting worms, actually a combination of red wigglers and Indian blues. And there's a little bit of difference. It took me a long time to understand the difference in them, but they're basically composting worms. But I want to pass this around so while I'm doing the presentation, you can just look at this and you can open the bag, you can smell it, you can feel it. I do sell this. Last year I was at the Haywood, Waynesville Farmers Market, Waynesville Tailgate Farm, I don't know, there's two of them. I was at the one that's at the Hart Theater. And so, and I sold my product. I sold the vermicompost. I do sell worms. I also sell worm tea. And so, but you can look at this, and like good compost, it doesn't have a bad odor. It's just nice, rich compost, and I will tell you all about it. So you can just pass this around as I'm doing the slideshow, the PowerPoint. Let's see, where to start. How did I get into this business? Well, I retired almost 2 years ago. I taught math at Tuscola High School for almost 20 years. And so when I finished, I thought I'd really like to do something different. And so I heard about this job opportunity that you could become part of this business. They would supply worms. They would teach you how to take care of worms and a lot of your supplies, and then they'd buy back your product. It was out of Concord, which is near Charlotte. And so I thought, that sounds like fun. I want to do it. Got into it, and it ended up being a scam. There you go. How could somebody do that to people who love worms? But it really, it does infuriate me that someone would take advantage of people and take their money, but I got most of my stuff, and I'm very happy with my worms. I only see it as an asset and a good thing. Only I have to do my own marketing, and that's gone more than my expectations. The buildings, the business is growing, and this is a part-time thing for me. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. I wanted to, before I start my slideshow, just real quick, there's different kinds of compost. You're going to hear from me today. You're also going to hear from Mary Decker. And basically, what Mary will talk about is called thermophilic compost. And that little prefix therm means heat. And so the process she'll talk to you about is making an outdoor pile, and heat is what's involved in that process. Mine is called mesophilic, and it's the worms that make the compost. And so there is a difference. Of course, the value of compost, I don't know if you know this, the value of compost is not in the NPK. If you go to Walmart or somewhere and buy a bag of compost, it's real impressive. 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. No, the value of compost is really in the microbes, the bacteria, and that is the fascinating part of vermicompost. It's called vermicompost, the prefix vermi, worm, and I will say, since the two processes are different, the mesophilic and the thermophilic, if you read the research, the thermophilic, since it is hot, does have some effect. The heat does kill off some of the beneficial microbes in that process. Of course, you can do cold composting as well. And but the worms, gosh, there's just some magic. There is just some magic with worms. Who knows what it is? I mean, they're trying to figure it out. But the worms take in the microbes, and then what they excrete, called castings, that's like worm poop, castings, is just super enriched with the microbes, okay? So that's a little bit of difference in the two final products, okay? I'm going to run through this presentation pretty quickly. It's real basic. I do it for 6th graders. I do it for master gardeners. I go to HCC to the horticulture class. So I'm going to go through the presentation pretty quickly because you might have questions, and the presentation's pretty basic. I've given you 3 handouts. One of them is making a compost bin, so you might want to have that one on top. The second one is the uses of the vermicompost. That's kind of the second part of the PowerPoint. And then the third one is the Mountaineer article that has it come out yet, Jim?
No, it's next in line.
Okay, next in line, and so I think it's online, but that's the article that Jim helped me with. I appreciate that so much. Okay, all right, so let's go with this. Composting with earthworms. There's 2 aspects of worm farming. Vermiculture is the study of the earthworms themselves, raising earthworms as a product, and I do that. And then vermicompost, this is vocabulary. Vermicompost is the composted product generated by the earthworms. The vermicompost is the worm castings or the worm poop, and it's mixed with composted food and bedding in which the worms are raised. If you see a container, go to Walmart. You can buy worm castings at Walmart now. I don't know. They're in a closed container. How many live microbes are going to be in that? I don't know. Maybe not. There's a lot in mine. But if it says 100% worm castings, I don't think so, because they don't completely process their food or their bedding. I went to well, it's actually the World Conference. It's the NC State Vermiculture Conference they have every summer. And it's the only one like it in the world, and people come from all over the world. Oh my gosh, Venezuela, Malaysia, everywhere. They come from all over. And they do a lot of research, and you just have it's a huge spectrum of businesses and people who come, and I was so inspired. I went, not this past summer, but 2014, and it just really got me going on the research and the thought about it. But, I mean, if it's 100% castings, that means you'd have to get out a microscope. That's what the question was asked. Could it be 100%? You have to get out a microscope and say, well, this is a little worm poop, and this is a little peat moss. So, no. The vermicompost is a mixture. And so what I bed in is peat moss for the most part in my farm. And I'm varying that a little bit. You can have all kinds of coconut coir. You can have shredded newspaper is what I'm going to show you today. All kinds of bedding. And there is residue of the bedding in the vermicompost. Just makes sense. And is residue of whatever food that you give them. All right? I just start talking and I think, where am I going to stop? There's just so much to say. Vermiculture, there are over 6,000 types of earthworms. Composting earthworms are called red wigglers or Icenia fetida is how you say that. Yes, ma'am?
Are those native worms?
They are not. They're composting, and 6,000 kinds of worms. People say, well, I go out to my garden and I dig the worms and I'm going to put them in a bin. Well, if you dig night crawlers, there's three different types of earthworms. Night crawlers burrow straight down, and then they come up. You know, you've seen them on the ground. Okay, they burrow straight down. They're not going to be happy in a bin. You know, they can go really deep, and that's how they survive the cold winters. There's another type of worm that burrows vertically in the soil, not as deep as the night crawlers, and I could give you the epigeic and anaceic and all the names, but it doesn't matter. The red wigglers are surface dwellers. So if you did find them here, you would generally find them under some leaves or under a log, or they're surface dwellers, but that causes a problem. People say, can I buy them and put them in my garden? Well, they might stay there. They might not. They might survive the winter. They might not. So they're a little bit different. No, I wouldn't just go out and say, oh, look, there's a red wiggler. First of all, there's a lot into that. 6,000 6,000 kinds of worms. So there could be some native ones. It would be a little bit hard to tell. What is this not doing?
So it's what makes them composting? Sorry.
What makes them composting?
Is it how they burrow, or is it?
It's the kind of worm that they are. So I have red wigglers. I also have Indian blues. There's African night crawlers. There's so many different kinds. But the composting ones are the ones that are surface dwellers. They quickly compost your material, and they're suited for bins and for home systems or whatever. Okay? All right. Icenia fetida, just to go through it quickly, they're small worms, 2 to 6 inches long. They eat half their weight in food daily, and there's a lot of variables in that. They're 80 to 90% water. They have no lungs, but they breathe through their skin. They have no teeth, but they have a gizzard. They have no eyes, but they have receptor cells. No noses, but chemoreceptors. No arms or legs, obviously, but they have setae that helps them burrow through their bedding, the soil. Okay? The life of a red wiggler, the adults lay about 2 to 3 eggs or cocoons each week. The cocoons take about 45 days to hatch. There are an average 3 worms in a cocoon. This means each adult worm produces about 9 babies each week. What is that, Sarah? I'll close it. And a baby worm grows into adult in about 6 to 10 weeks at this rate of reproduction. Ideally, worms can double every 2 months. A red wiggler can live up to 4 years. Now, if you do the math on that, it's a lot more than doubling, isn't it? I mean, I'm a math person. That's a lot more than doubling. It all depends on your environment. Right now, my worms are in a room that's sort of like a root cellar. It's running 50-ish. Oh, they're slow. They're not doing a lot of this right now. So it all depends on your environment. I think one of the most interesting things here is that red wiggler can live up to 4 years. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Just basic facts about the red wigglers. What do they need? Moisture, oxygen, warmth, darkness, bedding, food, and peace and quiet. And that last one's, that's a little variable. I say it's sort of funny. Where my worm room is, right beside it, my son, who is a jazz drummer, has his drum set there. So, I don't know. They don't get a lot of peace and quiet, but they like to kind of be left alone. Yes, ma'am. When they die, they usually crawl to the top, and then they kind of just stop, and then, but before you know it, they're disappeared. And I think a lot of times they die in the bedding, and they're just gone. They're 80 to 90% water. Wow. So you don't see many dead worms. There's different ways to raise red wigglers right now. This is the system I have. You see, those are concrete mixing bins. They're shallow, and I have a shelving system. And I have the bins pulled out there. I'll water them. I feed them. Right now I'm feeding them Purina worm chow. So, yep, I go buy it in big bags. It's a grain-based food, Purina worm chow. And this is a harvester over here. So how do I separate my worms? There's a bin of worms up there. That's screened. I have 2 different sizes of screen, and I'll put the worms in the top end, and I'll turn it. I wish it was automated. It's not. I'll turn it, and the castings fall out, and the worms come out the end. So that's just basically what I do. I am converting this system to what's called a continuous flow through, which is think of this big table being a bin, and then an opening at the bottom, and you keep the worms in it, and you keep putting the food on the top, and then you take the vermicompost off the bottom. I really want one of those. The worms are real happy when they're all together like that. But this is what I have now. And there's so many ways to have worms. You can also have a home bin. I'm going to show you one of those, the top picture. In California, there's worm farmers that have their beds outside. They're called windrows. And there was one farmer that came to the conference I was at. I think he said his windrows were 1 mile long. Oh my goodness. I mean, he's like, rolling in the dough, like $80,000 a day in the production of his vermicompost. You can see the truck over there. See that little truck compared. So it's a big operation. It can be. Can't do that here. It's too cold. All right. Why would you want to raise red wigglers? Some people do for bait. I sort of tried that a little bit and had trouble how to sort out the larger worms. But composting, a lot of people use composting, and that's just growing. And it's just so thrilling to hear people go, "Oh, I saw that on TV. I want to do that." Home composting is easy. Composting is a process whereby organic matter, plant material, is broken down over time into a rich product called humus, which is a good fertilizer and soil amendment for gardening. So I think my bag of vermicompost has made it around. Okay, here it is up here. Did you think it looked pretty good? Oh my word, it's wonderful. So let's talk about the vermicompost. Compost is compost produced by worms and microorganisms living in organic matter. The worms suck in the microorganisms and the bits of organic matter, which pass through the worm's digestive tract and then is excreted as worm castings. And they can't figure out how the worms do this. They take this product and they take the microbes, and when it comes out, it's just like super enriched. And I could give you all kinds of stories about them taking in, what's the word? I always forget this word when I'm trying to think of it. Bad stuff. What's it called? Toxins, toxic substance, taking it in and somehow chelating it, and it comes out, and wow, they dealt with it. Who knows? How does it happen? It's a lot of research on that right now. Vermicompost is a mixture of the decomposed bedding, any nutrients left from the worm food, and the castings. So what are some of the benefits of a vermicompost when you use it? It supplies organic matter to the soil, helps the soil retain moisture, reduces the density of the soil, helps the soil retain nutrients longer. So those are just physical aspects of how the vermicompost improves your soil. If it's clay, which yes, our soil is clay, or if it's sandy soil, it changes the texture. Aids the growth of microbes in the soil. So my favorite little phrase is, the magic is in the microbes. Magic in the microbes. Supplies beneficial microorganisms to the soil and plants, helps the plants to better utilize nutrients, and it suppresses disease and repels insects. And there's some tremendous studies about that. There's a man in New York, his name is Tom Herlihy, and he owns Worm Power. If you go over to Jesse Israel and you want to buy some castings, there it is, Worm Power. The castings from that company. And he is in connection with Cornell University, done lots of research in. He sells to greenhouses that have like 3 million broccoli plants, and they use his product. It's just phenomenal, huge business. But their studies have been on how the vermicompost suppresses pythium, which is dampening off. And really good research, really, some real good facts there. So I came home from this conference and I said, hey, I can do my own study. I'll just plant some seeds and I'll see how they grow, and I'll do different different percentages of the vermicompost and see. So just instead of getting into every detail, I drew first graph is basil, second lettuce, third marigolds, fourth the cucumbers. If you look at the bluish gray graph, that is after, 18 days are on all of these graphs. That is the medium. I had peat moss and I think I had vermiculite in my medium. The bluish gray had no vermicompost. Then I put in 5, 10, and 20% of the vermicompost. I'll just quickly, the green is the 20%. You can see it outperformed in all of those. There is a point that the vermicompost, you wouldn't want to put 100%. It actually can suppress growth. So there's a point, and it's interesting. 20% in most plants, and each plant varies, is kind of like the best percentage. So a little bit goes a long way. Here's the picture. 16 days. And so 0, 5, 10, 20, what do you think? 20%. It was like, whoa. And it really, I see a great improvement in plants when I use it for germinating. And the second sheet I gave you was about the uses of the vermicompost. I use it in germinating. When I'm doing transplants, I'll dig a hole and put half a cup. It depends on how big the transplant I'm planting. But like tomato plants, I'll dig a hole and I'll put a half a cup of the vermicompost, mix it in. You can do side dressings of perennials, roses. You just kind of work it into the soil, especially around the drip line for your plants. And let's see, what else? Oh, I'm gonna make worm tea. Oh, worm tea. That's what has really been wonderful. I'll take the vermicompost and I'll put about a 5% ratio of the vermicompost in a 5-gallon bucket of water. Dechlorinated water, by the way. If you are on city water, you have to let your water sit for 24 hours to let the chlorine dissipate, because the chlorine will affect the microbes. And so a 5-gallon bucket, and I'll put my vermicompost in just loosely. And last year I used molasses as a food for the microbes. And since there's been some research that says maybe molasses isn't the best thing to do, so I'll probably use fish emulsion and different things this year. And I put an aquarium bubbler, supply the oxygen, and leave it for 36 hours. And it begins to bubble and froth, and it's alive. And I'll pour it up and take it to the farmer's market, sell it for $3 a gallon. And someone will come one week and buy 1 gallon, and they'll come back the next week and buy 2 or 3 gallons. I had one family up to 7 gallons a week. They loved it. And so you can apply it just by watering your plants. You can't overdo it, just water like you always do. Or you can use it as a foliar spray if you want it to go further on a garden area. Again, it's supplying those microbes. And the microbes work in the root zone of the plant to help the plant uptake nutrients. And a stronger plant is going to be disease resistant and repel insects. So that's probably my favorite way to use the vermicompost is in the tea itself. And you can make that process as simple as putting some vermicompost in and dechlorinated water and let it sit for a day or two and stir it to get some oxygen. But not absolutely necessary. The reason that I'm going to stop using the molasses, and this is a good food for the microbes, but there's some concern that could introduce pathogens somehow into the system. So I'm going to, like I said, I did do some fish emulsion last year, and I'll just try some different stuff, algae and different kinds of additives. You can also add minerals, azomite, and some different things. But it's not 100%, I mean, you don't have to have a food, but yeah. I mean, they're going to grow if you give them oxygen and in the water. So healthy soil makes healthy food, right? Vermicompost is called black gold. I'm going to go through this real quick because I'm going to show it to you. To set up a home bin, shredded newspaper, cardboard, some of your most common beddings, food, chopped up food scraps. They love it. They love, oh my gosh, avocado. They're crazy about avocado. I like avocado too. I don't have many to give them, but they love pumpkins, fruits like cantaloupe and honeydew. Oh, they love those fruits. Moisture, keep the bedding wet but not too soaked. You don't want moisture dripping out the bottom of your tub. They like it wet, but that's not the best thing. Oxygen, you want to make air holes in your bin. Warmth, 59 to 86. You just don't want to freeze them, and then they can get too hot. Darkness, if you're going to have a bin, you want an opaque bin. And then peace and quiet, oh yeah, I guess that's sort of relative, but they don't like to be messed with all the time. But I'll take mine and fluff the bed because they can tend to be get compacted. Oh, that's it. Okay, so what I'd really like to do is I want to show you my bin, and the only way to do that is to kind of let's see, I can pull it out here and you all can kind of come around. Are there some questions before I show you the bin and show you the worms? Yes, ma'am.
If they're eating the micronutrients in the soil, why do you need to give them dog food or chocolate food?
It's not dog food, it's actually worm food, but
Oh, I thought you said puring the dog food.
worm chow, Purina worm chow, yeah. You can give chicken feed. I mean, it's just more for them to eat, you know, and the microbes are what's breaking down those food particles too. So they kind of do both. They, you know, do they eat the banana peels? Well, sure they do. They eat the microbes and they eat the decomposing food, and it just all works together. It's just a way to supply them nutrients, yes.
Do they also eat the avocado, the outer casing?
No, they don't.
So it's just the inside now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be better on the floor because
We
it's
can
just...
bring it up, we can get it closer,
Oh,
whatever you want to do.
I think I can point it out better. Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. I think it's just a little bit, it's kind of hard to see in
Are there
it.
holes at the bottom of the bin?
There are some holes in the bottom just in case you get too much moisture, but you don't want that much moisture. You're overdoing it if it's dripping out the bottom. And you're going to have a hard time harvesting your castings if they're just like mud. So you want to keep it kind of the right moisture, and that's real important. If it gets too dry, the worms aren't happy. They breathe through their skin, and so they're not happy. And if it gets too wet, then you got a wet bin. Yes, sir.
I've noticed all over that if there are a lot of heavy rain,
Yes.
all of a sudden the earthworms all over the place. What do they do? Trying to escape the moisture in the soil, and then they die because they're exposed?
Worms can actually, you can have worms in aquaponics. So are they trying to escape the moisture? No, not really. I mean, they really love the worms, but it's the oxygen content in the water. So like in the aquaponics, there has to be a lot of bubbling and stuff. So my hunch, and you know, I hope I'm not wrong on this, is the night crawlers. They're the ones that come up out of their deep burrows and come to the top. They come up because of the oxygen. If you see worms that, you know, they come up and then they die, usually it's not because of the water, it's because of the light. The light will kill them. Yeah.
And then I've done this a number of times. You start off with soil in your garden that is really not the most impressive.
Right.
And you add layers of compost and mulch and so on. And bingo, hey, presto, suddenly you've got earthworms.
See,
And when I see that happen, I say, oh boy, I'm doing well.
you are right about that. And so, you know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The good soil comes first. So I'll have people say, oh, I have this terrible soil, so I want to buy some worms and put them in here. Well, they're probably going to leave your system and go find some better soil. It's, you know, the worms do improve your soil, but it's the good soil that attracts the worms.
So then that feeds on itself. And
Yes.
Once you've started that process, it'll be a
If you have worms in your garden, that's a wonderful sign.
Okay, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my last question is,
Uh-huh.
you mentioned the vermicompost. How often does one need to put vermicompost into one's beds, for example? Is it a once-off thing and then you let it just take its course, or do you have to continually feed it?
And that's a good question. I didn't mention when I plant seeds in my garden, I'll make the furrow and I'll put the vermicompost in. So when you're germinating, it improves germination. If I went back to my chart and we really broke it down, those graphs, it germinated more quickly with the vermicompost. So the vermicompost helps that process, or the microbes. And so that's a good thing. And then, you know, after your plants, you know, a few weeks after your plants get going, you want to fertilize it. You could side dress plants with vermicompost. You kind of want to work it into the soil and not leave it on top, so that those microbes get down into the soil. So you can do that. You can do it ongoing with the tea. You can cover your, if you have a raised bed, you can cover your raised bed before you ever start gardening and work it in. So there's so many ways to do it. You could do it at the end of the season, just like you can work in any kind of compost to promote that. So does that answer your questions? There's lots of different ways.
If I've got a rose bed, for example,
Right.
and I add vermicompost to it,
Right.
do I ever need to do it again once those vermicomposts have started breeding and everybody's happy?
Yes, I would.
You do?
I would use a side dressing at least yearly,
Okay.
but more often than that, probably.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it done away with the need for chemical man-made fertilizers?
Well, so when you're a worm farmer like I am, they say don't use the word fertilizer. Use the word soil amendment. You get kind of into this technical difficulty if you're saying fertilizer, but whatever it is, it makes your plants grow. There's other ways to add nitrogen and NPK that are natural, and I don't know how many of you are interested in the organic side, organic gardening. There's other ways. This is an aid. This wouldn't maybe replace everything. No, it doesn't really. When I think, okay, here's my corn, and it really is a high nitrogen feeder, then I'm not going to rely solely on my worm castings. I'm going to look for some, something that is high in nitrogen. Yes.
When you get your bag of vermicompost,
Mm-hmm.
your sealed plastic bag, should you leave it open?
Yes, I tell people to leave it open, use what you can, and then leave it open. Leave it. Make sure. I mean, remember, there's microbes in there. If you can, don't let it completely dry out. Keep it a little bit moist, and that if you go to buy it, like I said, in Walmart, and it's this closed plastic container, it's completely dry. Well, I mean, it's got the benefits from the worm poop itself. It doesn't have the microbes, so it can't, And the worm tea, I didn't mention, you have to use the worm tea within a couple of days. It's quick. You want to go home and water everything. Yeah.
So if one wanted to do this,
Yes.
not that I probably will, but, all right, you got this container, you got your worms in there. How often do you harvest the soil that comes from the worms?
So when
How
I
long
show
does
it to
take,
you-
and how do you?
I mean, there's so many different kinds of systems. It's a little bit hard to answer that question, but for the most part, it takes worms about 3 months to really decompose the bedding that you put them in. And, right now I'm harvesting some castings that the worms have been in for 6 months. That just means it's really rich. And mine is a peat moss bedding. And peat moss and sawdust compost has some horse manure in it too. And so usually, I mean, you can tell by looking at it. It's still paper. It's not ready to harvest. Oh, it looks like castings. Oh, it is harvest. So as soon as I show you.
You would take those worms out, put them somewhere else.
Yes.
And you're left with.
Yes, yeah. And there's different ways to take them out and to harvest depending on what your system is. Yes.
Yeah, how much kitchen scraps can maybe a bin like this?
They say they can eat their weight. I think it said half their weight. So if you had a pound of worms, maybe a half a pound. But what you want to do is when you start out a bin, you want to start out slow. They kind of gradually get into their routine. You want to start out slow. You don't want to overdo the food. You don't want the food to turn sour in your bin. So if you had a pound of worms, theoretically you could do half a pound a day. Now usually you put about a pound in and then you wait and you see how long. So it all depends on your system and how it's working.
So unless you have a huge system, this is not your only composting option for a household.
Yeah, I don't put all of my scraps in. There's some things that aren't even suitable for that. So, I thought on the back of the sheet about making a bin, let's just talk about that just right quick. Because I want you to see this bin, and I appreciate the questions, but, on the back of the bin, it says worms, the ones about making a bed, the food the worms like. You don't want to put meat or cheese or milk products. They're not crazy about onions, I don't believe. That's kind of questionable. Citrus, which is high acid, you wouldn't want to put those. So You're exactly right. You don't put everything into your bin. There's lots of things you can do as you put it in. I like to chop mine. The smaller you can make it, the faster it decomposes, the quicker the worms can do. I mean, there's people that chop and freeze and cook and do everything for their worm food, but you don't have to do that. I mean, then there's people who throw a whole pumpkin in. If you put a whole pumpkin in a system like this, it would turn to total mush, and you'd have all this stuff dripping out the bottom. So, does that answer your question? It has to fit your system. Yes, sir.
If you would want to get some vermicompost and mix it in with peat, I guess, to germinate your seed.
Yeah, that's what I do. I do vermicompost, peat moss, vermiculite. You want to add, you're going to use peat, you want to, it's acidic, you want to put some lime in there probably to balance that out.
How much?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look it up. It's usually, I know for 4 gallons, it's like half a cup of lime, the dolomitic lime. Is that a good estimate? Yeah, that's what I do when I'm making my bedding, yes. I do have more of the handouts. I want you to come up because I want you to see this, and because you're going to have some questions.